Hello, I'm Marna Miller, a senior researcher at the Washington State Institute for Public Policy. The Institute was created by Washington's legislature to conduct practical, nonpartisan research on questions of interest to the legislature. In 2007, the legislature created the Racial Disproportionality Advisory Committee to analyze and make recommendations on the disproportionate representation of children of color in Washington's child welfare system. The Washington State Institute for Public Policy was also directed to serve as technical staff for the advisory committee. And the charge was to examine the level of involvement of children of color at each stage in the state's child welfare system, including the points of entry and exit, and at each point at which a treatment decision is made. The data analysis have been completed. The next stage is for the Advisory Committee and the Department of Social and Health Services to develop a remediation plan to reduce disproportionality in the child welfare system. So today I will tell you about the results of our analysis. Most children enter the child welfare system when someone makes a referral to Child Protective Services alleging abuse or neglect. The Disproportionality Advisory Committee chose to follow the cohort of children referred to Child Protective Services in 2004. This allowed at least 2.5 years follow-up for each of the children. In 2004, there were over 79,000 referrals to CPS, and because children can be referred more than once, this represented 58,005 individual children. The first decision point is whether or not to accept the referral. A referral might not be accepted if the reporter couldn't provide enough information to follow up with the family, or if what the reporter described wouldn't qualify as abuse or neglect. In 2004, 43,423 children had a referral accepted. The intake worker also assigns a risk tag based on what is described by the reporter. Risk tags range from 1, no risk, to 5, very high risk. Children with referrals tagged 3 or greater are assigned to investigation. In 2004, 35,474 children had a risk tag high enough to trigger investigation. Of those children, 4,744 were removed from home. And of those children, 3,194 were in care for over 60 days, and 1,476 were in care for over 2 years. So how do we measure disproportionality? Well, measuring it is a two-step process. The first step is to calculate the rate. That's the number of children with an event divided by the number of children in the population. For this example, I'm going to focus on Indian children at the point of referral to Child Protective Services, but we make these same calculations for all races and at all of the decision points. So, for example, in 2004, 5,612 American Indian children were referred to Child Protective Services. And according to the census, there were 55,872 Indian children living in Washington in the year 2000. So we calculate the rate for Indian children. We take 5,612 children referred divided by 55,872 children in the population. So the rate was 0.100. And then to get rid of decimal points, we multiply by 1,000, and this gives us a rate of 100 Indian children referred for every 1,000 Indian children in the population. The next step is to calculate a disproportionality index. To do this, we divide the rate for each racial group by the rate for white children. So continuing with this example, the referral rate for white children in 2004 was 34 per 1,000 children. So we calculate the disproportionality index for Indian children by dividing the rate for Indian children, 100 per 1,000, by the rate for white children, 34 per 1,000. This is equal to 2.92. We interpret this to mean that Indian children were nearly 3 times as likely to be referred to Child Protective Services as white children. So we calculate rates and disproportionality indices for each of the races at each of the decision points. And then we plot them on a chart to see visually what the patterns look like. These charts have disproportionality index along the vertical axis, and the decision points and lengths of stay are displayed along the horizontal axis. We also include this red line for reference. This is the disproportionality index for white children. And because we define disproportionality as relative to white children, the disproportionality index for white children is always 1. So at referral, we see that Indian children are 2.92 times as likely to be referred to CPS as white children. At later points, we see Indian children are 4.5 times as likely to be removed from their homes and over 6 times as likely to be placed in care for over 2 years. The Legislature also directed the Advisory Committee and the Department of Social and Health Services to develop a remediation plan to reduce disproportionality. Because changes in policy and practice within the department may have less influence on referrals, we also calculated disproportionality index after referral. This allows us to look at disproportionality that occurs once children are within the child welfare system. And now we're comparing children, in this case, Indian children referred to Child Protective Services to white children referred to Child Protective Services. So with this definition, disproportionality index after referral is 1 at the point of referral. We look at later points in time, we see that Indian children who were referred to CPS are over 1.5 times as likely to be removed from home compared to white children referred to CPS, and over 2 times as likely to be in care for over 2 years. And now that we understand how to read and interpret these charts, I'll show you what these patterns look like for the other racial groups. So for black children, we find that they are 1.9 times as likely to be referred to Child Protective Services as white children. They are 2.3 times as likely to be removed from home and 2.8 times as likely to be in care for over 2 years. When we look at disproportionality after referral, compared to white children referred to CPS, black children are 1.2 times as likely to be removed from their homes and about 1.5 times as likely to be in care for over 2 years. Hispanic children are 1.3 times as likely to be referred to Child Protective Services. And following referral, the line is fairly flat, and when we calculate disproportionality after referral, we see no evidence of further disproportionality for Hispanic children. And finally, looking at Asian children, the pattern is quite different. We find that Asian children are less than half as likely to be referred to Child Protective Services. And once the children are referred, the disproportionality index is fairly flat. And when we calculate disproportionality after referral, we see no evidence of further disproportionality for Asian children. On this chart, we'll display disproportionality for all of the races. So at the point of referral, we see disproportionality for Indian children, for black children, Hispanic children, and Asian children. And following referral, we see that disproportionality is greatest for Indian children, followed by Black children, then Hispanic children, and Asian children. So what this tells us about disproportionality statewide: racial disproportionality exists, and it is most pronounced for American Indian and Black children. Asian children are less likely to be referred to Child Protective Services than white children. Hispanic children are more likely to be referred to CPS, but there's little evidence of disproportionality after the referral. And when does it occur? Referrals to CPS account for much of the disproportionality. For Indian and Black children, disproportionality increases at removal from home and at continued placement in foster care. Because much of the disproportionality occurs at the point of referral, we wondered whether the type of reporter might explain the disproportionality. Broadly speaking, there are two types of reporters. There are mandated reporters who are required by law to report suspected child abuse or neglect, and these include medical professionals, school personnel, DSHS employees, and other social service professionals, child care providers, and law enforcement. But anyone can make a report to Child Protective Services. And these non-mandated reporters include relatives, friends and neighbors, parents, and others. When we look at who refers to Child Protective Services, we see that across the races, about 60% of the referrals come from mandated reporters. The exception is Asian children, where mandated reporters are more likely than the other races to report children. The remaining 40% of referrals come from non-mandated reporters, and this is the same across all races except for Asian children. We can calculate a disproportionality index due to mandated reporters, separate from a disproportionality index due to non-mandated reporters. This is the disproportionality index for mandated reporters. And when we calculate a similar index for non-mandated reporters, we see that disproportionality index is slightly less, but we still see disproportionality. So our conclusions about reporters are that mandated reporters and non-mandated reporters both refer Indian, Black, and Hispanic children at rates higher than white children. Disproportionality is only slightly less if non-mandated reporters are analyzed separately. That is, relatives, friends, and neighbors call CPS with concerns about Indian, Black, and Hispanic children more often than they do for white children. In summary, racial disproportionality exists in Washington's child welfare system. Disproportionality is greatest for Indian and Black children. And the points of greatest disproportionality occur at referral to CPS, removal from home, and continued placement in foster care. Our analysis covered other topics as well, and those are in our report. Those other topics include permanency outcomes for children removed from home, legal outcomes for children removed from home, the relationship between poverty and family structure and outcomes for children, and geographical differences in disproportionality. The full report and copies of the technical appendix can be downloaded from the Institute's website. If you have further questions, feel free to contact me either by email or by telephone. Thank you.